thought I'd do something different today, or something I haven't done in a while, but it was kind of on my mind as things happen, and that is talk about prepping your players, not the characters, prepping the players so that they understand the challenges that are going to be in the games. And by challenges, I'm talking mostly about combat, though it can actually be different sorts of challenges, presumably, but I think it comes up in combat quite a bit. I think it's more of a problem or more of an issue. It tends to be in modern D&D than in old school D&D, but I think it can still arise, and I think it's a good time to talk about it now for regardless of which type of game you're playing, especially since I think there might be more chances now than later that you might be coming to an old school game from modern D&D, giving something like Old School Essentials a try, or Shadow Dark, or any of those games that kind of sort of try to bridge between the modes of play. So, well, let's just get into it, right? So, in an old school game, it's talked about quite a bit, though overstated at times, how lethal, the lethality of the game, how how quickly and easily and disposable those first level characters, and even characters with a few levels on them can be. I say overstated because sometimes it you look at it on paper and you go, "Oh my gosh, I got 2 hit points. I'm gonna get whacked." But I think, as often as not, you can find ways to survive these things and even thrive with having a few hit points. But of course, you're always subject to one unlucky swing, or I guess one lucky swing from the other end, and then you're gone. So it's kind of an ever-present threat, even if it's not necessarily always as as deadly all the time as it's talked about. Sometimes it is. How do you, as a player, handle that, right? Or how do you, as a GM, should say, should get your players in a position to handle that, whether your games are really lethal, whether they're not. And the first thing, I think, it's really just the conversation. You have to have the conversations about it. You have to talk about it. You have to. When I was started my game, and pretty much throughout it, I would continually iterate. Remember, look at your hit points. Look at what I remember the first time. I don't know if it was session 0, but it might have been. We were playing a BX based game. I was homebrewing and kind of house ruling fair amounts of it, but I wasn't house ruling or homebrewing very much on the damage front. I did put a dying mechanic in there, mostly because I just like dying mechanics. I like the tension. I like the rising tension of this person's dying as opposed to just dead. And what do you do with that? Do you try to save them? Do you try to get them out? Or do you leave them to die? I just thought that created some interesting tension that I wanted to capture. In any case, I remember instructing the players, all right, look at your hit points, look at how much damage weapons do, and pretty much I was using basically flat D6 damage, I think, across the board. So your weapons, and this is also going to be true for monsters. They do D6. Look at your hit points. It's also a D6. You could do the math, right? Do the math. It's you are going to be, even if I give you 6 hit points, you are still probably going to go down, and maybe let's call it 2 hits. If you have 6 hit points, and you're full health, you're going to get two shots. If each hit you receive does basically average damage, so you get max hit points, and then each enemy is going to do average damage, which would be about 3.5 on a D6. So we'll round it up to 4 hit points of damage. Then you're good for 2 hits, and you go down on the second hit. So you need to plan things accordingly. And that's, by the way, that's just 1 hit, right? If you're fighting 5 goblins and they're taking swings at you, then the chances are, multiply those chances out in terms of what your survivability is. One person tries to hit you, you can do that. Well, what about, and that's 2 rounds, but what if you have 4 people trying to hit you, right? It's pretty easy to show people that math and say, hey, it's deadly. And I think that's maybe the primary thing you have to do, just to show them the deadliness. But that's not going to prepare them for it. It might make them feel like, okay, they understand the mechanic, which I think is important. But the kind of prep I'm talking about is to really get them in the mode. I think ultimately what you want out of your players is for them to feel like the captains of their own ship. And when they take a particular challenge on, when they look at something and they look out and they see across the distance, they're hiding in the trees. They look down the road and they see that the troop of goblins are coming down the road with prisoners, and they maybe we roll dice or they count heads. Okay, there's 10 goblins and they're dragging 8 prisoners behind them, and we have so many guys, whatever. And they make that choice then to charge down and take on the goblins with just their, say, 4 or 5 of them, maybe, and they get cut down due to the mathematics that I just went through, that they don't throw down their dice and look at you and blame you as the GM, or talk to some kind of unfairness as the GM, that they have gotten it to where they accept that, hey, we took a chance and we lost, right? We took a chance and we failed. To give an example from my own game, I play in a game in person, and last week we fought these giant ants, and these giant ants were pretty nasty. Now we encountered them maybe a level or so ago, and so they were less nasty to us now because we've leveled up. But still, they were pretty nasty. But when we get there and we get into it, we kind of know, okay, we know these things are kind of nasty. We didn't realize kind of how much we'd kind of powered up in the interim. But there was a lot of discussion back and forth of, should we engage these things or not? We wanted, it was in a tower. We kind of figured we'd like to take this tower and had access to something we wanted. And we think there's loot in there. And we wanted all this stuff involved with it. But we knew that these ants were around. We didn't know how many. We're like, okay, these giant ants are infesting the place. We can't call the Orkin Man. We are going to have to be the Orkin Man. Orkin men, Orkin people. So, we got all that. So when the combat went well for us, but whether the combat succeeded or whether we succeeded or we lost, none of us would have been mad at Daniel, because this was our thing. Like we chose where we were going. We chose what we were doing. And we, in a sense, chose to engage with these particular opponents. And if these opponents bested us, then they bested us. And I think maybe I didn't really quite write in here, but I think that's where I'm getting at with this first thing, right? Make them feel, you have to make sure the players feel and know that, I guess I say feel in case, whatever. Some people running kind of narrative games, it's going to be maybe a little bit different because you might be driving the action a different way. But essentially, the players have to feel, at least, hopefully it's true in reality, that their decisions are driving the action. Because when you feel like they're not, when you feel like you're along for the ride, you're a passenger, then suddenly things are going to feel a lot less fair to you. I played in a game, and the GM, and it wasn't an edition specific thing. This was just this GM style, because I playing several different games, and it was essentially the same every single game. And that is that combat was just really, really, really hard. However they managed it, it seemed like, I don't remember ever being there for some kind of horrible defeat. I felt like it would always be by the very skin of our teeth. We would tend to pull it out. I don't know if that was us or them fudging numbers. I have no idea. And I coming from this experience, I definitely felt like I didn't like it. I didn't like it because it didn't feel like anything we did really had any impact on the combat. The combat was always going to be just tough as nails. It didn't matter. And this is kind of where I'm getting in here, the things to avoid kind of the over quantum ogring. I don't know what techniques the GM was using, but if the encounter is always kind of the same, and we try to take the high ground, and it's still just this horrible slog. Okay, we're gonna try to hit them from underground. Horrible slog. Oh, front gates, I guess. Horrible slog. At some point, one, you're just gonna stop trying things because it doesn't seem to have any impact, and then 2, it just gets grinding because it's just going to feel like a grind. It's just going to feel like you're just getting ground down. And I know that I didn't like it as a player. I can imagine that other folks don't like it as a player, because just number one, variety is the spice of life. I think if I were hand tailoring encounters, I think even the advice is right. Maybe something that's really hard, something that's kind of moderate, something that's kind of easy. Now, I don't go for that sort of thing, but I can understand the logic there, because when you're a passenger, you don't feel like you have that control over your combat. So you don't get to choose. You don't get to choose if you're just a passenger. Oh, hey, I don't want to fight those guys today. I'd like to do this other thing. Or, oh, I don't want to just come in through the storm through the front gates. That's not the plan I would take. And so once you lose that, then it kind of is incumbent on you as the game master to really master the game in that way. And when you're going with something where you're trying to present more of a dynamic world, in which case the challenge is kind of where you put it, then as you want your players to feel like they kind of own their piece of it. And that piece is kind of making it happen. If you choose to go after the dragon and you get the dragon, then you're not really upset that you got the dragon. But if you don't choose for the dragon, and I'm kind of accepting wandering creatures from this because that's kind of a separate dealio, but I think those things have ways of mitigating that, right? Mitigating themselves a little more than kind of set encounters. Though ultimately, I think, hey, Frederick, I think that the idea of your choices matter because in a wandering creature, really, and this kind of lets me into a second point I wanted to bring up, which was success isn't linear. Whether it's a wandering creature or something else, if you're in a situation that's going bad, run away, right? This is the thing that's so hard for players to wrap their minds off or GMs to kind of get there. How do I get my players to run away? How do I get them to run away? Now, often this comes from, I think, goofy GM ideas. Like, I want them to run away. I want them to face something bigger than them and realize to run away. And I'm doing this because I want them to see my big bad evil guy is so strong and so tough that I want them to see this guy and then have to run away screaming. And they don't run away screaming, and the big bad evil guy just kills them or something. And you're like, I this wasn't satisfying to anybody. How do I get them to run away? And that's not the right mindset. But you could try to instill in your party, and really the way you're instilling this is through kind of conversations. I don't think this is something that you try to do in the fiction kind of thing. I think you just have to keep letting them know, like I did with my players, hey, it's okay to run away. It's okay to run away. It's okay to want to run away. Frederick says, wandering has a dog house and a food bowl. The dragon's got a dog house. Yeah, sure. I'm not sure who keeps a dragon, who's got the big enough dog house for a dragon, but maybe. But they have to understand that running away is not a fail. It's not their progress isn't trap. Their progress isn't stopped. There's other ways to do this. You can do something else. You all these things are very linked together too, because once you make them, once players understand that their decisions are driving the action, that they're making a choice, and that they're going towards that choice, and then the challenges that they're facing are a part and parcel of the choices they're making, I think they're more apt to take a 360-degree look at that decision or decision tree or whatever, and then start to loop around more. Whereas if they feel like it's linear, they're going to treat it more linear. I think so. I feel pretty confident in that statement. Right? If the more your party thinks, and the other thing too is, this isn't about what your game is, because a lot of people will start to get really defensive. Oh, it's my game's not linear, blah blah blah. What it really is kind of less important than what your players think it is. And I've talked about when I had my failure running a hex crawl one shot. I was running a hex crawl or attempting to. The players thought I was running something very linear, and they treated it as such. And it didn't matter. At the end of the day, I could tell them, oh, look at this, the other, but it didn't matter because they didn't feel it. They didn't know it. I didn't do a good enough job impressing it upon them and making them feel it so that they understood all their choices. So you may have a game that's wide open, but the players don't understand that. You haven't communicated that enough. You haven't established it, or, it doesn't, I'm not trying to always say it's the GM's fault and everything. No, it could be mismatched expectations. It could be they just don't have a play history. Lots of things could enter into it, but ultimately, since you as the GM, in a sense, are at least half of driving the game, is to continually to promote and let them know, if they don't understand it, if they don't get it, that these things are happening. Now, in the game I planned, Daniel Bandits Keep, who's the GM, doesn't have to do that because everyone understands it. Obviously I've played a lot of games, and I came in, I kind of understood it, and his other players, he has some history playing games with, and I think we're all on the same page as to how things can go, and it's been well established, the openness of the world and all that stuff. So, once you get your players past a certain point, a lot of this kind of falls away. But it's certainly the thing you have to do to get there. There is just, I think, the prep work that you need to do. Another thing, signposting your dangers. this is, there's always going to be exceptions to everything. Right? I'm not trying to paint something like, oh, you always have to do this, you have to do that. Because of course, sure, there might be a wandering creature, or there might be an ambush, or something where you're not, where it's kind of the specifics of a certain scenario are not going to allow you to do one or more things. That's kind of understood. So I'm not trying to build, or I'm not, or I'm, this is not meant to be something to kind of to be straw man and say, oh, you're always supposed to signpost danger, but what about a hidden trap? Like, that's not what I'm talking about, right? Of course, there are going to be exceptions to everything, and just going to take some apple cider for the working man. Frederick says that the boxing ring encounter from the Castle Amber module, if done wrong, is very fatiguing. If done right, it's the most fun the players can have. I haven't read Castle Amber in a long time, so I only have the most vague recollections of the boxing match. But I think in general, when you have things that, some things I think that, just as a GM, kind of any kind of puzzle, right? If you have only one answer that can possibly work, the puzzle is going to be fragile. It's a fragile puzzle. And that is because, on the one hand, if somebody gets the answer, sure, it'll feel great. Oh, there's this one thing you can do. And if you treat this puzzle like this, then, oh my gosh, it's an amazing experience. Well, how many people catch that? And then for the many people who don't catch it, what are they experiencing? And I'm not saying make every puzzle. I'm not a big fan of kind of abstract puzzles and dungeons anyway, but I'm not saying don't have them. But maybe what I'm saying is, and this goes for any kind of challenge, really, it's a good fit for this, because with a challenge, it's that linear success again. You have a locked door, and to undo this locked door, you have to do this Sudoku. Well, if I love Sudokus, I'm going to love that puzzle. Oh, Sudokus, just what I always want to do is play a Sudoku. And I, as a Sudoku player, I'm now fully engaged in playing out the Sudoku. But me, I don't like Sudokus. I'm not interested in doing Sudoku. I don't come to play D&D to do a Sudoku. So when that puzzle hits, if this is what we must do, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to attempt to do it, but I'm going to be annoyed about it. I'm not going to love it, certainly, right? But maybe maybe that's the optimal way to open the door, because then you open it up and it doesn't make any noise, and whoever's on the other side's not aware of you. But can I just crowbar the door open if I need to? Can I break it down? Can we cast a spell magic on it? What other options are there? And I think that kind of linearity is, and I think it's easy to fall into. It's certainly something that's going to happen in pre-written modules, more or less, because it's tough for them to write about everything. There's just limits to how many options you can put in. So I think they tend to go with the one thing or maybe two things. And it's like, well, you're going to have to kind of figure out one of these, or they'll put some caveat like, hey, your party comes up with another answer, another way to do this, and great. But, getting rid of as much as possible linear moments. You don't have to get rid of them all the time, because there's some things where I think a linear sort of choice is just, sometimes it does boil down to, you got to do X or Y or something else like that. But at least for the, that's kind of I feel like it's more the exception, to the rule. So, but having non-linear opportunities, or 360 degrees of at least thinking, if not, you can't always move in 360 degrees. We've got walls, we've got doors, we've got barriers, whatever, but being able to think in that sort of way, and making sure your players know that you can, which can be difficult. It can be difficult for the party to get to the door that's locked or that's stuck, and they try to do the obvious thing. Maybe, oh, we try to break down the door. Doesn't work for whatever reason. And then it's just, can we do it again? Can we do it again? And they're not looking at, oh, look, there's a crowbar in the corner. Oh, look, there's a magic sigil. And you got the magic user who's just twiddling the thumbs over there. If they would just look at that, and, they're not doing it. They just assume that, okay, we got to break down the door. Or that door doesn't open, but there's another. If you go down that corridor down there and you go around, you'll get right to the same spot. But they're thinking linearly. That could be because of just how they've interpreted your game. It could be because of their past gaming experiences. But in any case, you want to try to shake them out of it. And how you shake them out of it, I really think it's going to be mostly in terms of, well, a couple things. You have to have the conversations with them. You have to keep letting them know and reinforcing. And then, of course, the other thing is that willingness to go with them. And I kind of wrote that in here as ignoring context. So I feel like that's not exactly what I meant, or it's not enough. But sometimes you can get, as a gym, you can get caught up and you're like, no, this is how you're supposed to do it. They're not doing the thing I want them to do. I think they're supposed to do. And so you end up boxing them out to it's just back to now you're creating a linear situation. You may not think you are. You're in your own brain. It's always hard to be outside yourself sometimes when everyone's like, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing here? I've boxed them into a certain situation. I didn't mean to, but I did. But if you don't recognize it in a session, I don't blame you for that. It's kind of hard. I think that's a really pro trick, to be in the middle of a session and see where you're doing something and kind of shake it. Say, oh my gosh, I'm doing this thing. I'm going to stop. But certainly you can reflect on it between sessions. Say, okay, I'm going to come back to this next session. I'm going to talk to them before the game. I'm going to let them know I was wrong about that, and whatever. And then I'm going to try to fix it. Frederick's got something. Frederick says that the demon web pits for the doors to other worlds, they add little brass signs. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the kind of these one-way-ish kind of doors. That's cool. I think you could definitely, the signposting, I think is important for stuff like that. It's not going to be everything. And I think sometimes we treat signposting like it's like the cure-all. Oh, just signpost it. But the signposting is only going to help, I think, when you have these other bits lined up. If your party doesn't think they have a choice and they don't feel like they can do things in a different way, then the signposting is going to be of limited use. Because that signposting saying, if you go down this way, there's a dragon. Okay, great. But that kind of presumes that we can not go that way. If you don't feel like you can switch ways, get off this path. Dragon down this way. We're going to hop off this path, go somewhere else. Then all the signposting may be helping your prep for the dragon, but depending on whatever's going on, you may not even have the ability to do it. So it's like, okay, there's a sign that says the dragon is a mile away, but we feel like we're stuck on this path and we can't get off. We're on the railroads. So, all right, dragon's a half a mile away. We're still on the railroad. I guess we don't really have much to do. And then the dragon's here. So yeah, you signposted it all the way down, and the party, and I think I see this quite a bit. It comes up, right? Oh, I tried to signpost. The party's not listening to not hearing, reading, seeing my signpost. They're just going on for it. And I think it's because they don't think it matters. If they don't feel like the signposts allow them to put the brakes on, then what is the signpost doing? Telling me, again, the dragon's there is only good if I feel like I can then stop and either sort out what to do, go back another route, do something else. But if I feel like it's just ahead of me, then it just seems like, rather than signposting, it's just building the tension. Oh, I just thought it was the atmosphere. I didn't think we had a choice. I just thought, I don't know. You're narrating that we're moving into this dragon infested area, and okay, we're moving in the dragon infested area. Like, what did I think I was going to do? And I think that's often that disconnect. You as the GM feel like I'm trying to promote to them that there's a dragon here and that they should probably stop, turn back, be careful, get some anti-dragon spells if they've got them or whatever. And then the party doesn't. It's probably because they think that they're on this linear pathway. And remember, it's their perception. It's not what you are delivering. It's not what you think you're delivering in your head. It's what they are perceiving from you, which is why having the conversation, an ongoing conversation, is important, because you're not necessarily going to find out till after the fact or after a particular session, after a particular moment, that that's how they were feeling. And this is something you see on Reddit stuff all the time. Oh, I did this and this and that, and this is how it ran to my players, whatever. And and oftentimes the boring answer is talk to your players. Have a conversation with your players. Did you talk to your players? Have you talked to your players? I think you should talk to your players. I mean, there are only so many different ways you could say it, but that kind of is what it is. Now, you can do different things in your prep. If you feel like things are getting very linear, I could say to you, well, try opening it up. Try having, instead of everything being like, maybe, there are ways you can set the scene in a different way. And this will run kind of counter to some advice you hear, but sometimes not Deus Ex Machina, in media res. In media res means beginning in the middle of things. I think is what it technically means. And it's when you sort of start a scenario, if you want to call it a scene, an encounter, kind of in the middle, right? You're in the action. And this is kind of a jump start because you're not wasting time with kind of the boring parts, like getting there and doing any kind of equipment or buying stuff. Like, nope, we're just gonna boom, you're there. You're at the door of the dungeon. Great. But sometimes what that also does is you're clipping these opportunities for the party to take that decision into their own hands, to shape their approach. So let's say, for example, you might be Tomb of Horrors is probably not the best one, but imagine something like Tomb of Horrors. If you start them at the front gate, so to speak, in Tomb of Horrors famously, there's like two ways to go in, if I'm remembering correctly. Where the one that looks like it's like a false entrance, and I think it's a death trap. And the second one, I think, is kind of, anyway, there's kind of two entrances, one's bad. You have to kind of figure it out. Or anything else where there might be a back door or some other way into. Or something where, like, you're supposed to not go in the front. Like, was it Tower of the Stargazer? I guess spoilers for that, I believe. I'll get that one right. If you go up to the front door, it's a wizard's tower. You're going in there, and the idea is that the front door it has some kind of, is magically trapped, and will basically one shot, I think, or kill, save or die, somebody who just kind of goes for the doorknob. And the idea is that it's a wizard's tower. Like, what are you thinking? Going to the front door of a wizard's tower? Your expectation should be that it's trapped with some kind of magic spell, and sure enough, it is. It shouldn't. The context is supposed to be, should not be a surprise. Well, what happens if you start your game? Say you're running a one-shot up Tower of the Stargazer, and you start them right at the front door. You're not telling them they can't back up and do a 360 of the tower and consider other ways in. I don't remember whatever not necessarily the right way, but the easier way into the tower is. I don't recall. But you're kind of compressing the visible decision space to the door in the tower. So they're probably going to deal with the door in the tower. And then if three of them die because I don't even remember the spell that goes off, whatever, they're going to probably look at that and say, that's super unfair. You put us in front of this door and we touch the door and you kill us. And you're like, well, you're not supposed to actually touch the door. You're supposed to do this other thing. Or you're supposed to, you should know, because I read you the flavor text that says this is a powerful wizard's tower, blah, blah, blah. You're supposed to know not to do that. And instead, you're supposed to try these other things instead. Okay. But you put us right in front of the door, right? You didn't mean to, but you kind of compressed our decision space. Whereas if you started further back, again, I don't know Tower of the Stargazer all that well. It's been ages since I've looked at it, but let's just say that for our purposes, that it's on top of a little mound that's in the middle of a kind of a plain. If you start back off in that plain, approaching the mound, well, now you've opened up that decision space. Now suddenly maybe the party's more likely to check around the base of the tower. Is there anything secret down there? Are there any back doors? Are there, what do we see? All that stuff. And this is not to say that they couldn't do it from the other one. It's just that a lot of folks, and I'm not accepting myself from any of this, are going to feel like, okay, here's our immediate surroundings and here's where we are. You had to back off that, give them some space. You have to give them some maneuvering room. I mean, I've talked about this with wandering creatures and everything, right? How much time and distance do you have until the thing is on you? Because if the thing's right on you, you're probably going to fight it, because you're not going to feel like you have any choices. And if you spend around trying to negotiate and they jump on you, they're getting an extra hit that you are. The opportunity cost, if you decide to try to talk and they just attack you, means that you're probably going to attack them. It's just the way you are. If you're at 30 feet and you're like, either we attack them because we won initiative, or if we win initiative and then we decide to try to talk and they attack us, we don't have any time or space to do anything else. And now we've just taken attacks. The mathematics have put us in a bad position, because now they have one free round of attacks that we cannot return. So we should probably attack them. If you give them 120 feet of space, suddenly all kinds of options open up. And not only that, but coming back to some of these things, what is the space no longer seems linear. They're at 30 feet. What can we do before they just jump on us? Well, could we try to evade? I suppose, but it's kind of difficult. They're right here. They're at 30 feet. We move 30 feet. They move 30 feet. It's kind of, we're kind of stuck. And assuming oftentimes monsters are faster than people anyway. So it's like, chances are we're not going to be able to do that. So that decision space is going to make things feel linear, even if you're not. Hey, Shadow Monkey, appreciate the appreciate the thought. It's going to feel very linear, even if it's not. The space is just compressed. Open up the space. Suddenly you're like, oh, maybe we can maneuver. Maybe we can try to get around them. Maybe we can do this or that. Maybe we can, right? I mean, you can just feel it opens up without you really changing anything about the scenario. You haven't changed the way you've done anything. You haven't changed anything, but you've kind of pulled back from that immediacy. Appreciate it, Shadow Monkey. Uh, getting a little, you're making me blush here. You breaking out that by pulling back from that immediacy, which I know is something that a lot of folks will recommend. And it's not that it's bad, but everything's situational. Giving that space, that's probably like maybe the ultimate thing, right? You have to give your party the space. You have to give them the space to do things that they can see. They can see that there's everything is at 360-degree range we want. And this is not even if we're running like a sandbox thing. Even if we're running kind of the old linear adventure, how are you giving the party space to decide things? In a dungeon, it's kind of easy because this stuff is doors and corridors and rooms, and they can generally choose, we hope, which doors to take, which rooms to go into. And if you're, modern dungeon design will tell you shouldn't have just one linear way through. There should be many ways through. If you're a fan of Jacazing your dungeons, and why wouldn't you be, in terms of having multiple ways in and 300, up and down and looking at verticality and having all kinds of interactivity, then we get on top of factions and everything. What is all that stuff doing? Is it's giving your party a bunch of choices they can take and that they have ownership of. It's harder to do conceptually in other spaces because you don't see it as well. In the dungeon, you can see it because they take different directions, they open doors, and they physically move. In other situations where they're decision points, it's a lot less clear, right? If everything was a dungeon, in a sense, it would be very obvious if your party was playing very linearly or not. If they were just moving kind of forward, and then hitting locked doors and then not looking from side to side to see if there are any doors, but just banging forward, you could probably look at it and say, yep, they're taking things extremely linearly. They're not even looking. Anything off to the sides that isn't just straight ahead of them, they've just ignored it. They feel like it can't be important or worthwhile or it's just off the beaten path, right? They're just going straight. Whereas if you saw them and they were kind of doing all kinds of moving around and checking out different things, you can say, okay, they kind of got it. But outside of that, it's not so easy to tell. And like I said, I think maybe the hardest thing is to recognize when you have, when you either you have not presented it, and I'm not trying to kind of place blame, but really in terms of just how can we recognize what we want to fix? I think most GMs would say they want to fix. They want to have players that when challenges come, if they go their way, then it's them that did it, right? Oh, the players won this encounter. The players won it. It wasn't me. And then also, if they fail, the players aren't looking at me and saying that's unfair. I was reading on Reddit the other night, and it was a player's point of view. A player was posting their frustrations with their GM because they felt like their GM was just doing really hard encounters all the time, and it was basically just refusing to change it. And the reason they said it was refusing to change it was something like they didn't have time, which is silly. I don't have time to do this. I mean, you can always just, I don't understand what that means. Just change some armor classes a little bit. You can make it easier. There are 12 goblins. Now there's 10. I don't know how much time is involved, but in any case, they were refusing to change it. Right. And this person was getting very, very, very frustrated. I think it'd be very easy to look at that player and kind of do the whole like herder, get better, scrub. Right. But like I mentioned, I played in a game where all the encounters were super difficult and it didn't seem to matter what we did. It didn't matter what edition we were playing. I played with them in third 3.5 edition. I played with them in 4th edition. And I played with them in 5th edition. And none of those altered really the difficulty of the encounters. The GM always had them up here. That was just the way they like to play. And I remember getting frustrated with it because me as a player, I'm always trying to figure out like how we can kind of maximize stuff, how we can minimize, not my character, but just the situation. Can we figure out a way to get an encounter in our favor? Can we do these things? And it just didn't feel like there was anything I could do. And there weren't ever any easy wins, which meant that you really had to be, you couldn't really be, you didn't feel like anyway, whether this was true or not. And it might not have been true. That I could talk to that guy. He's a nice guy and say, hey man, this is always always how I felt, but what was it really? What was on your side? What was it on your side that you were doing? Maybe he would say like, oh yeah, that was just my style. Balls to the wall all the time. 24/7, the thunder will roll. Maybe. In which case, I'll say like, yeah, it's just not the style ultimately I prefer. But it could have been that I had misunderstood something, missed something, anything. But the point of whatever it was, like I was doing, and I know I wasn't the only person to feel that way. I think he played with some folks he's playing with for a long time. So it could have been just that this is just the style they were accustomed to. This is how I play it. They all knew it. And me as the new person, I didn't know it. And I had to kind of adjust myself to that. But assuming that that's GM, that wasn't really their intention or whatever, it's, you don't know you're doing it. And it's not, look, I get I get that at a certain point, the players have to, I hate that the players are looking for this difficulty in a meta sense. Like, I don't like it. Like in the game I play in, right? We encounter these giant ants. The first time we encountered them, we didn't know these giant ants were just crazy tough, but they were. And our response was like, oh my gosh, we got to get out of dodge. These things are too tough. Holy cow, get out of here. We didn't jump to like, it's unfair. These giant ants are too strong metal, on a meta level. It's an unfair challenge. Why did you throw giant ants like this at us when we are clearly not the right level for it? Like, we never had that thought, never entered our brains. It was just like, oh my gosh, these giant ants are really tough. Like, holy cow, these things are tough. Let's get away. And then we came back. How do you get somebody going from, and keep in mind that some of these players, they play and run 5th edition and other games. They're not unaware of how monsters and things are done, but what they are is they are aware of, because I think Daniel, to his credit, has educated them on how everything works. And this is maybe the last point that I have is in that you got to understand the mechanics and procedures. Not necessarily knowing everything, though I don't actually feel like that's a bad idea if they do know everything. I don't think it kills anything to know, hey, this is by default, right? Every other round, by default, we're going to be rolling for wandering creatures. It may be more, it may be less, and the odds may go up and down, but here's kind of what it is normal. And, it's going to deviate, but that's what you got, kind of thing. If you know the procedures that come into play, then things are going to feel, I guess it's GM, whether you tell them to it beforehand, whether you tell them as you're playing it. And I've seen games where people will say, I remember I was reading once, I was following a game. It was a play-by-post game, and they literally had it. It was very kind of board game style, but I think it worked. Is they just said they were every post that the GM would post, the referee would post, they would put the name of the round or the turn, and when wandering creatures, it was turn 1 was whatever, turn 2 he would have wandering creature check, and he would he would roll the dice and then post, roll the dice and he'd post the results. So wandering creature check, roll to 1, wandering creatures, skeletons, distance, 80 feet. And then he would put what that would mean fictionally. And then when round 4, same thing, whatever we're doing, wandering creature, or they were doing, because I was just reading it, not playing it, wandering creature check. Okay, zombies 50 feet away. Here's what the fiction suggests about that. When the players are aware of mechanically what's happening, whether they know the ultimate details or whether they just know a certain amount, it's like rolling the dice up in the it's like rolling the dice out in the open. It's taking away this idea of the responsibility of the GM. This is not my responsibility. You're in the dungeon 8 turns. I'm going to roll 4 encounter checks. If a couple of those encounter checks go, maybe that's good luck, maybe it's bad luck, but it's not me. Whatever it is, it's luck. It's not me. I may have set the conditions, right? Okay, we're going to roll every 2 rounds, and it's going to be a 50% chance because this is a hella busy alien enemy spaceport that you're infiltrating. So it's a lot of people walking around there. But those are all things that I should be communicating to you in the fiction in terms of, hey, this is a crowded area, right? You're in the enemy keep, and they are mustering for battles. So the corridors are packed for the most part. There's a lot going on. That informs you, and there's a wandering creature check that's happening. There's that procedure happening, and that this is a crowded place. I don't have to tell you offhand to know that, okay, there's probably a good chance we're going to run into things in here, unless we can figure out some way around it. That means that if you do run into something, it might be the dice. And I think that's another reason why I like rolling dice out in the open for this stuff is, hey, okay, so we rolled a wandering creature. All right, you over there, Timmy, roll 2d8 for how many of these mercenaries you've encountered. Timmy rolls a 10. Oh man, that's bad news. 10 mercenaries, or I guess 10 into 2d8 is not too bad. Oh no, 10. Not my fault. Not my fault. Timmy rolled the dice. And, and I can at least say that, hey, yeah, I could have said any amount of mercenaries and I chose 2d8. But I'm not doing that in the moment. This is not me freelancing to try to crush you with a heavy encounter. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. So that was something that was just pre there. Yeah, I had 2d8, so I rolled 2d8. That's it. But if the players don't understand the mechanics and the procedures and everything's opaque and kind of black box to them, then they have no other way to know that it's not just you. And if it's you doing it, then you come back to this linearity. They don't feel like they're driving it. They feel like you're driving. They feel like they're putting, and this happened in my hex crawl, they felt like I was just putting creatures ahead of them. And, even though even afterwards I had to kind of walk them through, but still the feeling to them was, regardless of how I thought I was doing it or how I was doing it behind the screen, to them it was just like, hey, creatures are running up in front of us. Doesn't seem to matter what we're doing. This is happening. So, there it is. I've talked about things that you probably want to avoid. You don't want to, the over quantum ogring. So quantum ogre is this concept of you create an encounter, and you may have done, and it's more of a thing, I think, in newer games. Not that it's a kind of a modern D&D thing, because it really applies anywhere. And I've seen it pop out in things that are not necessarily modern D&D. But I think it arises out of the concept that has evolved anyway of encounters as very handcrafted, artisanally baked situations. So there might be moving parts, battle maps, all this kind of stuff associated with an encounter. An encounter in this case with the quantum ogre, it's not so much like, oh, it's just an ogre. Like it could be like that was you were saying, oh, it's more like I got this ogre and I got the battle map, and maybe I'm on roll 20 and I put all the lighting in, and it had a really interesting, it wasn't just in like a forest thing. There was all kinds of stuff going on. I spent a lot of time. Like, I'm really proud of this encounter I made with this ogre, and now the party's gone another way and they're never going to see this ogre. And why did I spend 2 hours doing all this crap if they weren't ever going to experience it? And the idea of quantum ogring is like, hey, just put that in your toolbox. So yeah, they didn't encounter the ogre in the Weeping Woods, but you don't have to throw it in the trash. Put it in your toolbox, and then next time they're in a woodland area, maybe they encounter the ogre then, kind of thing. And that, which is really a good thing, right? You think about that. There's no downside to that. Yeah, sure. Put it in. They didn't ever hear about the ogre. They never heard, it never came up in play. That particular rumor, they didn't roll on it. Whatever happened, like, yeah, it just ended up sitting on the cutting room floor, so to speak. So yeah, repurpose it somewhere else. But the concept kind of got morphed into this idea of you have an ogre and you don't know which way the party's going to go, and the ogre just kind of ends up wherever the party goes. Right? The party goes left. Oh, look, there's the ogre. Party goes right. Oh, look, there's the ogre. Kind of thing. Brian Smith says, make sure the party's loins are girded. Absolutely. And Brian also says, I always added all the bells and whistles to boss fights. Usually only built them when the players were locked in already, though, like after a cliffhanger session. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some of the stuff you kind of can learn to sort of prep so that you don't get so much of it. But yes. So what quantum ogring kind of turned into was this concept of, hey, whichever way you're going, you're getting the ogre. And I've seen it in different ways. I saw it not in the Tome of Adventure Design, but I saw it in one of these books. Like, it might have been How to Write Adventures from, I can't remember. I had to pull it out. But they had this encounter in there where you're going down, you're in the wilderness, but you're basically on path. You're essentially in a dungeon that's overland. You're in the wilderness, but you're on path. You're basically locked on a kind of corridors of paths, right? You're not just going in the woods whichever way you want. You're on kind of two paths, and you literally are trails. And you literally get to a point where the trail splits in two. And then if you take one trail let's say going south, I don't know, I think that whatever, they're going north. You go on the northeast trail, something happens, right? If you go on the northwest trail, you get wolves. And then there's a note that if you took the northeast trail, or like you get to this, and I think the note is, the trails end up kind of coming back together, and like you cross over a bridge or something. And then it says, and then there's a note saying, hey, on the other side of the bridge, if you didn't get the wolves before, you get the wolves now. Which essentially means that if you took the path that avoided the wolves the first time, now you get them. So why bother? Why bother having the wolves on one, right? That's the same, and that to me is like the worst kind of quantum ogring. Now, granted, there was nothing in the text that said that there was wolf sign or something. They were kind of just floating off there. You don't know when you make that choice to split which way to go. You have no idea, at least by the book, without the GM looking ahead and reading a thing that like, oh, there are wolves somewhere. So it's not like you're making your decision based on the wolves. So I think theoretically the idea is that the players don't know, so they just get the wolves. But I think sometimes you do end up knowing. I feel like sometimes you get that feeling. I think with a lot of things that these techniques that GMs think are so slick, that especially when you repeat them and you use them over much, it becomes kind of obvious. It becomes kind of obvious, you know. And I think that the quantum ogring, when you overdo it, I think it becomes obvious. I think it's fine at some points if you have to do it. My argument is always that no single encounter is so precious that I need to jam it into the game if it doesn't come up kind of organically. Like, I don't care. But I'm also not putting all that work in, because my encounter's like a little note saying, oh yeah, there's an ogre in the woods. Maybe there's a fallen tree there or something. Like, I don't know. I'm not trying to make some custom artisanal encounter with a dynamic battlefield and dynamic lighting and this, that, and the other. Like, I don't, it's not, this is not how I operate. So for me, if the ogre goes in the trash, the ogre goes in the trash. I'll just roll something up otherwise. But I think we can appreciate, depending on how you play your games, that like, yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into individual encounters. So yeah, I'd like to not throw that away. And the idea is with the quantum orders, you can, but I'm saying here is that if you do it over much, then that you're going to run into these two options here, right? One, the players are going to get the feeling that their decisions aren't really driving things. It's you and whatever you decided to prep that's driving things. And that they're going to feel that linear. They're going to feel the linearness. I think it's linearity of the scenario. If I go left or right and the same things keep popping up, and it always seems like you're absolutely ready with the thing, it's like, okay, I'm going to get the sense that maybe it doesn't matter if I go left or right. Then why even go bother with, let's just go right, kind of thing. Terrence said Quantum Ogre sounds like a good supervillain name. It totally would. It totally would be a great supervillain name. Brian asks, is there an acceptable type of encounter that is okay thrown regardless of context or player choice? Well, I think the wandering creature kind of thing is there, right? And there can be things. I think there can be, because sometimes and I'm just going to use the random encounter because it doesn't have to be a wandering creature, right? The random sort of encounter, or maybe I'll call it this way, the random event, I think is certainly something, right? You're in town and it's downtime. I roll up an event, and the event is the town's attacked by orcs. The party is not having a particular choice about that, but that it's happening. But they have a choice of how to respond to it. And that's probably the other option. It's not just the choice of getting into it, it's also the choice of getting out of it. That's down to that kind of linearity, right? So linearity. The party isn't just, it's not just, okay, we want to engage with the ogre or not. It's also that once we get into the ogre, is the only way through beating the ogre. Like, is that it? Or can we like see the ogre sitting on the tree stump and go like, nope, I'm noping out of here. And the GM says, oh, the ogre starts to run. It's like, great, we're running too. We probably can outrun an ogre. And if we can't, we're just going to keep running, but we're going. We're running all the way back to town, kind of thing. So, how do you deal with it, right? Wandering creatures and those kinds of events have kind of, it's just built into the way they are, that they generally, unless you present them in a certain way, or I guess unless your players, again, are feeling like you're linear, that because it's kind of by their nature, they're not accounted for. They're dynamic, that then you maybe feel more free to treat them dynamically as opposed to the set encounter, which you could feel like, oh, we hit that's kind of thing. Oh, we hit the set encounter. This was set to be here. All right, let's, this one's kind of fixed. Whereas you might think it anyway, especially if it's a wandering creature type thing or a random event, that because it's not set, you don't have to treat it set. Like, oh, this is the set encounter, so we have to beat it. Oh, this is something. Oh, this is just a random thing. Like, we can run away if we want to. Ryan says, if the quantum ogre was on a random event table, then it's justified. Well, it wouldn't be quantum really in the same way, right? And I do think a lot of it comes down to where your brain is at as the GM, because one of the things is letting wandering creatures. When you use wandering creatures or random events or things like that, you are engaging with the mechanics, and you're letting those mechanics decide. Even if you created the mechanics yourself, which we often do, you have put that in place. and you have decided these are the parameters of this space. And then once the game starts, you're in that kind of referee mode. So you're in the world building mode of I've set these parameters in space. Every 20 minutes, we're going to roll for a wandering creature. And then it's a 30% chance, 1 in 2 out of 6, that a wandering creature is going to show up. This is how I have decided that the world works. Okay, now I'm in the game refereeing. I'm following the procedures. And there's a cadence there because I'm doing it every couple of turns and everything. And right, depending on my style and how I want to do it, I could be very open as here's what's happening every 2 turns. Versus I'm picking and choosing. I'm putting this. Now you can, you might say to your point, Brian might be like, I could camouflage it. Could I camouflage my quantum ogre and kind of say behind the screen, rolling for wandering creatures. Oh, look at that. It happens to be my super well-prepared ogre encounter. Sure. And that will probably work. Maybe it'll work for a time. Maybe it would always work. But the spirit's not quite the same. If you wanted to take those extra steps because you were somebody that pre-preps the ever-living crap out of everything and you feel like, you know what, but the party doesn't, you want to kind of hide that part of it, then, yeah, sure. I mean, that was kind of like, didn't Gygax have that phrase, right? The sound of the dice, like the dice are just there to make that sound. Like I'm not going to say it's an invalid way of doing it. And the proof is going to be in the pudding of your table. If your table and your players, love it and you love it and everything, then there's nothing wrong with it. It's a style. Carousing results in 12 ogres, 1 for every man, 2 for every man, woman, and child in the inn. I mean, yes, ultimately everything is situational. And like I said, I wouldn't necessarily, I don't feel like having that encounter that you love and you want to have it and you want to do it is bad. Right. But you could probably figure out ways to do it without doing it. The thing is that whenever you're GMing, I was going to mention this the other day, and I was going to mention this in another video, and I just felt like I was rambling. I mean, not that I'm not rambling now, but it's a different kind of ramble. When I'm live, I feel like I have more license to ramble. If you're a player, and I'm going to relate this to GMs in a second, but if the players are doing a certain strategy and it's so overwhelmingly strong that it works way more than anything else, to the point that they're not trying anything else. Like I was on a Discord discussion, and the way this person was getting their games, their party was just using ambushes and basically the backstab ability or sneak attack ability from their rogues. They were playing Lamentations of Flame Princess, so their sneak attack, yet there was a little bit different rules there, just how they interpreted it, how Lamentations differs from, say, like just BX vanilla, but just the way it all worked out, the way this person was playing the game or running their game, it made that strategy of trying to ambush, get sneak attacks, to the point where that's all they were doing. And engaging in normal combat was seen as a big fail to them, and that they felt like it was way less efficient trying to engage in conventional warfare than it was trying to figure out, can we get this thing? Now, it wasn't just the mechanical part of the game. It was a lot of things, the way the game was, the context of the game, but also other things of how they're running, which is kind of what got me doing that video on surprise, was because one of the things I mentioned then was, are you giving surprise checks for things? Because they shouldn't be succeeding on these things 100%. And kind of, it should be it's a good strategy, but and one of my ending points was that if you look, because they were giving it kind of back and forth, which felt like they felt very secure in their position, which is fine. I'm not trying to tell them, ultimately, if it works for them, it works for them. But what I did say was, clearly at some point they recognized that this strategy was overwhelming. And what they were trying to do, part of what started the whole conversation, was they were trying to figure out how to buff up their fighters because of the strategy. What I was suggesting, if they look at the strategy and say, look, this is working all the time, and it's not something you see, this is not something that comes up a lot, like in BX discussions of, oh my gosh, how overpowered, superpowered are some backstabs and sneak attacks. I don't think I've ever seen that conversation. They're looking like maybe I'm overdoing something. And it's the same thing I would say, flipping it around to the GM side. If you were doing something and you're leaning on that a lot, to the exclusion of other things, it's probably worth looking at. Number one, thinking about, why am I using this particular technique? Why am I quantum ogering everything? And then number two, if you're seeing it, chances are your players are seeing it, even if they never tell you. Even if they never send you an angry email or something saying like, I'm pissed off or I don't like, or it's kind of bumming me out, or it's just my vibe. Because I think it oftentimes takes a lot for the average player to reach out and actually communicate that they're not enjoying a certain part of it, because they might be enjoying everything else about the experience, but that. Like, I had a lot of fun playing in those games. I didn't love the way encounters were, and those encounters were a large part of the actual game part of gaming, but I really enjoyed hanging out. I liked everybody. I was kind of newish into the city, so I was back in the city at any rate. So, it was good. I really enjoyed it, but that part of it, which frankly was a large part of the game, like it wasn't to my taste. But I never got to the point so frustrated. I mean, I think I would say stuff like, "Oh my gosh, how's their morale?" Like I would try to get like, "Whoa, like we've been just slaughtering these guys, and like they seem to all be fighting to death." Like, "Hey man, is their morale broken? Because we took out their captain and we took out their spiritual leader. Are they not breaking it?" That kind of thing. But I wouldn't go so far as to really be critical. And so I think if you ever find yourself leaning on a certain strategy so much, or leaning in a certain way so much that you're really kind of drowning in everything else, if you have the wherewithal to see it in yourself, which can be difficult, you're probably not the first one to see it. Terrence says, rule number one, never check your email. That's one. No DMs, no emails, no disintegrations. Brian says, sounds like the party enjoys setting up the scenarios and be more apt to change if they were getting tired of it. Obviously, Brian, I don't have the full context of the situation, but obviously they were keen on trying to balance out the thing. So, and this is the other thing, it's not necessarily apropos specifically of this, but oftentimes I've seen the GMs will want to change stuff that the party doesn't care about. The players don't care about, but the GM does. I was part of a little conversation today where someone was looking at different ways of resolving combat, that they weren't satisfied with the way combats were being resolved normally. And I asked them, like, well, what do the players think? And they're like, the players don't care, but I care. Right. So I don't know what their players of the game, if they love that or not. But I think you could find that sometimes these kind of things end up skewing the game one way or another. And the other thing is you can look to see how your players are responding or not. Like I said, right, if you're signposting everything and the players just marching forward, sometimes, and again, I've seen this stuff. I'm sure you've seen these questions. I signposted everything. How come my party didn't do anything? Question mark, question mark. It's not that your players are blind. They just don't think it matters, probably. I mean, ultimately, they probably see the signs and they're like, well, we're marching, you're leading us to the guillotine. We feel like there's no way for us to escape. So we're just marching the guillotine. We can see in the distance. We see it approaching. We can hear the drums playing. We see the flags waving. And yeah, we're not wavering from our course because we don't feel like there's another course we can take. We feel like you've put us on this railroad, if you want to call it, on this linear straight path to the guillotine. So now we're just going. And that's it. All the signposting in the world isn't going to save the players, if they don't believe that they can actually change it. The signposts work when the party is actually aware that they can read those signs and react to them, and that reaction will matter. If they don't think it will, either because they feel like you're quantum overing it, or does they feel like you're going to just ignore it because this got you thing, or or they feel like this is kind of a linear kind of game, then that's it. And to go back to kind of some of the things like I talked about, I wish I'd put a note in here, right? Talking about that kind of where you put your scope, right? That in media res, that is often, if you missed that part, I talked about a little bit earlier, that sometimes when you in media res something, which means starting in the middle, you force the context to a certain sphere. And even though you're not trapping people in that, the players in the context, they can feel that here it is, like in and this is where they are, and that kind of everything else is sort of out. And this can happen in myriad ways. And the example I used earlier was, hey, you're at the Tower of the Stargazer, and the game starts with you directly in front of the door. And just the way you set that context as a GM means that your players might not realize that they can back away from the door and take in the greater area and figure out what to do and take different ads. They may feel like, well, we're just at the door, so we're going to go to the door because that's what's here. When I played in a game, and it was a cool game, I've mentioned this before, it took place, we were in Assyria, and we were in Nineveh, and we're in the court of the king, and this kind of invasion is happening, and the Nineveh's under attack, and we just happened to be there with the king, and there was an assassin, or some guys broke into the throne room, and we kind of were able to handle them, and it was like, and then it's kind of this moment where the king's like, will you defend the city? And my character was an astronomer, and it was one of those like, well, yeah, well, I'll defend the city, right? But as a player, I was just super bummed out. Not that I didn't think I was ever gonna have to fight stuff, but I thought more there's gonna be more kind of adventuring sort of thing, right? And this was sort of we were thrown into basically 2 combats back to back. There's a little bit of a fig leaf of talk to the king about this thing you're requesting, and I was requesting like a new, I think a ziggurat or something, or some new astronomical observation center in my town or village or whatnot. Every other players, their characters had things they wanted. Then this stuff happens, and like, okay, we're put into this combat situation. And afterwards, the GM, reached out. I was like, like, what did you think? And I tried to be, I was like, I honest. I mean, I led with like the stuff. I like, hey man, I love the setting is awesome. I dig it. Playing in ancient Nineveh, this kind of Bronze Age sort of thing. Like, man, I am all in on that. And I said, but I felt like we got kind of, I don't know if I used railroading, but I felt like we just kind of ended up in this spot where it wasn't really what, like, I would have built a different character. If I had known that the scenario was Nineveh under attack, I would have built a different character. I built my character because I had this expectation of we're going to be doing one thing, and now we're doing this other thing. And I mean, I spent that whole combat. We were using, I think, Shadow of the Demon Lord was the rule set, which I need to do more stuff on. But at any rate, I think they have an aid kind of action where you can help, and that's all I did. This whole combat was essentially different variations on I helped somebody else because I had like no weapons. I had no weapon really proficiencies. I think ultimately I was on the kind of magic usery path, but I don't even remember if I had a spell or not. I don't even know if I can find that. I don't think I even have the character sheet anymore. So I think it was on a Discord, and that Discord channel has been purged. So I think all that stuff's gone, unfortunately. Anyhow, and he said like, "Oh man, but you guys could have said no." And I said, "Well, not if we're role playing it. Like, who says no to the king of the Assyrians? I mean, like, yeah, like he felt that he was giving us a choice. That, hey man, just tell the king, tell the king of kings, no, no, sir, we prefer not to. Sure, is that a choice? Is that a choice that one could make in a game? Yes. Is that a choice? Is that a choice that anybody who isn't kind of taking the piss out of the game is going to make? No, because just being in the moment in a character playing this, like, and maybe even knowing a bit about Assyria and knowing the kinds of things that Assyrian monarchs and their armies did to people and things like that. Do you tell the King of Kings in his throne room, no, you will not defend the city? Not likely, right? You're gonna take it. So it was kind of like he was thinking, man, they got choices. If they, he's thinking like, well, if they want to do a combat thing, they can, and if they wanted to do an escape thing, they can. But the reality was for us, at least my perception, was that there was no choice. I mean, this was the classic Deckard goes to see the chief, and he's like, hey man, you're gonna track down those Nexus 6s, and Deckard says something like, I was fast as I walked in here, I'm even faster walking out. And then, the guy kind of lays it down and says, hey, you're either one of, what is either like either cops or you're little people, right? And they really kind of in Blade Runner, the movie, they don't leave it any doubt that, because it even says like, so no choice, huh? No choice, pal. But that's kind of, take away all the literally writing out that no, you have no choice. Yes, I'm essentially forcing you to do this. And that's kind of the idea of that thing. So talking about that kind of linearity, it doesn't always have to be something super obvious like you're doing that, but it can be like where you've given them choices. Are you giving them choices that are kind of actionable? All right. The decisions they have feel like they matter, because the decision for me to say no doesn't feel like it's going to be honored. And it's not because I feel like the GM's a bad GM. It's just because in the context of the situation, it doesn't feel like that they're really asking me. I mean, now of course you can say, why would the King of Kings care if a lowly astronomer took to the walls or not? I don't know, right? That's a fair question as well. A different question, but a fair question. But you have to have those choices kind of matter, right? Patrick says, if you tell the Assyrian king no, you're free to go, just not with your skin. As soon as they're done flaying you, you'll be free to go about your way. That's right. They're just gonna take the skin. No problem. Yeah, you don't have to You don't have to go, but you'll leave your skin at the door so we can hang that up and tack it onto the wall. And then you can go, right, that's pretty much it, right? It was a choice in sort of name only. And it wasn't a bad intent on the GM. He wasn't trying to, I don't think he was trying to railroad us. I think he legitimately felt like, oh yeah, man, they got choices, but we didn't feel like, I mean, because we're not playing fellow kings. We're not on equal footing. I mean, to me, it's almost from a GM standpoint, that's almost the one I would prefer the most, because that, to me, that is a demonstration that your players are taking the fiction seriously. Because if you present something like that and the players are like, okay, no, at that point as a GM, you're like, what the F? Are they not appreciating that the King of Kings, who is, if you look on the walls of this room, it's got all the horrible things he's done to people who dared do even slight insults against him have done, and you're just going to tell him no in the middle, like, for real, right? It almost would be like if we took that no, like, it would almost, to me, in that situation, it would almost be worse. Like, really? Because you're not going to take this kind of seriously? Because it's a serious thing. But it's that kind of false choice. So, rambling aside, or now that we've finished with a bunch of rambling, how do we think we should get our players into sort of accepting the challenges that they have, right? I think they need to know their decisions are driving the challenges, that things aren't out there in the world so much. I mean, look, we're placing things in the world. I think ultimately, what is the game master, what is the referee doing, whether we're using dice, whether we're using our own things, we're placing stuff out in the world. But if the players feel like their choices are deciding what they encounter and when, and that these things, not only is the decision to engage or not up to them, how they engage, can they withdraw, can they use 360-degree thinking, can they move around, do they feel like all these things are kind of things that they have control over, I think is going to go a long way. Because again, if you feel like the stuff's beyond you, then it feels like, well, if I didn't plan to do this, it's not what I wanted to do, my character or me as a player, and I had no way of trying to change my plans. It wasn't a situation where I could say, oh, look, there are 60 pirates on deck of that ship, so we're not going to just attack the deck of the ship. We're going to do something else. Nope, we're attacking the deck of the ship. Then that becomes all the things the GM's doing. Then yes, it's going to feel a lot more like the GM should be managing this, because they are managing it, right? And it's unfair of the GM to manage. I'm not in charge of this. I'm not in charge of that. And I'm not in charge of this other thing, but I'm responsible for how this encounter plays out. Like, that's not fair, right? The players have to feel like they have this responsibility, that they are doing things, as their decisions that are doing it. They need to know that we're not playing a linear game. If something this doesn't work out, yeah, find another way. Either find another way around this, find another angle into it, but you can figure it out, and you have the freedom and the space in all ways to do that. You are not locked into a linear thing. If things are dangerous, or what kind of dangers they are, they need to be in some way signposted. There could be exceptions, but for the most part, things should see. If you have a citadel with 1,000 angry mercenaries in there, you should be able to look at it and see it. It shouldn't be, oh, it looks deserted, and then you step in the room and there's 1,000 mercenaries. Like, that's right. It shouldn't be. You can have a couple of those. It could be something where there's an exception for X, Y, or the other reason, but it should be a good reason. Otherwise, you should be able to pick stuff out, and that kind of goes back to that being able to have 360 degrees kind of motion and movement and thinking, and being able to signpost. Because if the signs are there and the party can read them, and the party knows that they can do things based on what they read, then they're going to react to them. If the signposts, if they don't feel like they can do anything about it, then those signposts are just going to look like little signs that they're waving on as they go down the way. And then, understand the mechanics and the procedures. Let the players know. I mean, there's more, but I think as a start, right, let them know what's happening. Hey, there are wandering creatures here. There are going to be encounters that you're not going to be able to predict, because you're in a dynamic place and dynamic things are happening. So get ready for that. So if you're fighting one creature and something happens, or it takes too long, or something, and whatever, and then someone else comes along, it's not me being a jerk. It's because you were there too long, or something's going on, right? There's kind of that world building as I've set up the place, and then the referee part is, all right, the place is set. Now I'm just playing through it, and I can tell you not necessarily how it's going to work in this particular instance, but it's generally going to follow these rules with some variation, of course, but it's going to follow these kind of rules. Terrence says, quote, "Hey, Star Nerd, you like castle defense games?" Yeah, pretty much. Terrence asked if we could have told the king yes and then snuck out of the city undercover night. We no. I mean, there was basically a set encounter of us fighting these troops. I think there was only the one. I think there was kind of like one assault. Guys came over the walls. We had to sort of fight them off in the street. And then the game, unfortunately, the game kind of fell apart after that. So I cannot say what would have been next, but I don't know that we were had to be gearing up for. I don't know that we would have been gearing up for assault number 2, or if we could have snuck out. I think because after I talked to them, I think they were going to kind of switch gears and we were actually going to adventure. So it was unfortunate that we got this piece of it, and then we didn't really get to the other adventuring piece before things fell apart, so to speak. Try not to overly quantum ogre, right? Don't because remember, I just have the feeling, I know I felt this way as a player. I think sometimes you think it's slick, you think they're never going to know, and then they kind of know. You just get a sense. There's just a sense, you get a little tingling in the back of your player neck that says, feel like we're going everywhere we're going seems to be prepped ahead of us. And I'm wondering if it really, like, you just get this thing, like, I'm wondering if it really matters. Like, I don't know. It just feels like we're going to the same thing. I mean, you can try to cover it up, you can do whatever, but like I said before, any kind of, if you're using any particular stratagem, I think all the time, one, it's always nice you should probably wonder, like, why am I doing this one thing all the time? Like, why am I quantum ogering everything? Right? That maybe I need to look at something else. This might be the symptom of something else I need to look at. And then 2, if I am doing this thing kind of all the time, and it occurs to me, it's probably occurred to somebody else also. Don't ignore the context. I really mean more like, don't ignore what players do. Don't ignore their things. Take seriously the kind of questions, and if they're trying to shade the fiction and the fictional positioning and kind of do it, like, don't ignore that stuff. Don't dismiss it out of hand. Give those things a chance, because remember, this is a lot of that is going to be how players are going to feel like their decisions are mattering. And the more of those things you just kind of not saying you have to agree to everything, and I'm not saying you have to go yes and all the time. It's not bad to do it. I'm not necessarily anti yes anding or yes butting or whatever, however you want to phrase it, type of thing. But it's that's kind of neither here nor there. It's one kind of technique of doing it, but you have to show the players that their decisions are kind of entering into things, that things aren't happening just kind of despite whatever they're doing. Despite our best attempts, this is always kind of seems to be happening, and it doesn't seem like anything we're doing is kind of changing the stakes. Because if you can't change that stuff, or the context, if you can't change any of that stuff, and you're just going to go back to thinking that you've got no choice. And of course, railroading, which is really kind of what all of these end up boiling down to, is if the party gets to a point where they don't feel like anything matters, and you're not helping, or you might be actively, just because it's not a game you're playing, then they're going to treat it like a railroad. And some people like railroads, but in those kind of railroad things, people, notice people who like to play railroads or become comfortable in it, they go with the flow. Hey, I'm on I'm on a, I know that I'm on a fixed track, I'm going to be fine. But notice that after a time, I'm not going to try to get off that track. I'm going to just let myself be carried along. And if that's not what you want, if you are not wanting people to get carried along, you want them to be more active, and you want them to be more, feel like they're in charge of their own destiny, and feel like that they're taking responsibility for all this stuff, then the last thing you want is them to feel like they're being carried along. And you could see it sometimes a little bit. You could be kind of canny, but all of this really boils down to having those conversations with your party, your players, reiterating it over and over and over again, especially when you're starting out your games. Just going through it again and again, checking in again and again, having those talks. If there's a session and it just felt like the players were just marching towards their doom, despite you trying everything you could, yeah, you can go on to Reddit and say, oh, I signposted the heck out of this stuff. Why didn't my party pay attention to it? But probably the important thing, the one that's really going to get you answers, at least somewhat, is, ask your players, hey, man, you guys didn't need to march in there. I tried to put everything that this was a bad idea, but you guys went anyway. Why? And, if you get some variation, like, well, I didn't think it mattered, I didn't think we had a choice, it's not whatever, then it's like, okay, somewhere we've had a failure that we can kind of address. Now, I'm not saying that if you do these things that every player's no player is ever going to scream unfair when a challenge comes back against them. There's probably always going to be a little bit, because it's a game and it's competitive and people don't like to lose. Remember too, just before I forget, like retreat, backing away, withdrawing is not losing. To me, in D&D, you lose when you're, ultimately, I guess really the closest thing to losing is really your character dying, or everybody dying, like TPK, I guess. assuming that you're not accomplishing, assuming you're not sacrificing yourself as a major goal. That's kind of the only loss, right? So anything you're doing beyond that is not losing. You're just repositioning for an eventual victory. But I think this stuff will help. Anyhow, I've been yapping on long enough. I do want to do that Sea of Sands map generation thing. I just wanted to kind of do something different today, and I was inspired, so I went with it. Maybe it'll be tomorrow. I don't know. I'm not going to put a time and day on it, but it will come, I think. But hope you guys found this interesting. Let me know in comments and where you find me. If I was on anything, if I was full of beans, wherever you feel I landed in the spectrum of helping your players rise to the challenges of the game, you let me know. Other than that, folks, enjoy the rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.